What's up, guys? Welcome back to the poker vlog. Really think you're going to enjoy this one. In this vlog, I play the online WSOP $10,000 main event. Play a lot of interesting hands, some bluffs that work, some bluffs that don't work, a lot of value bets that I'm second best on, and I really think you guys are going to enjoy it. Special in this video is a new theme we're trying, so just want to announce that. This is basically, Brad Owen's producing. He's behind the camera right now. Brad, please, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of telling everybody how great this is going to be.
I think you guys are going to love it. Let's go ahead and get started.
Wow, he's a little quiet right now, but I really think you guys are going to enjoy this video. Let's get into poker hands right away, and let's keep them rolling. Leading up to the main event, I did all kinds of preparation. I did as much study as I could in advance, but the week before the event, I decided to taper my volume down and try to take care of my body and my mind more so than usual, which I guess is not setting the bar super high. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect going in because the international main event didn't draw the field size that I expected, but I figured the United States one might still have a pretty big field, and I expected it to be pretty much the softest online 10K in history. Starting several days before, I made sure I had about $10,000 available on the site, peaked out at around 11K, and dusted off some in satellites. It's always nice to dream, I guess. And found myself on the day of the tournament with just a little bit over 10 grand in my WSOP account. I was ready to register, and I couldn't be more excited. First 10 minutes, I was pretty in my head, a little bit nervous, and couldn't really find my groove. But I decided to sit back, play tight pre-ante, and just take it easy. That ended up working as I was able to figure out some notes on my opponents, although I did miss the fact that one of the players at my table was the top-ranked WSOP Nevada player. Yeah, congrats on Player of the Year, bro. So anyway, diving into the first couple interesting hands that I played. My first table was also interesting in that Brian Picholi, a former main event final tableist, was at it. But besides that and a couple other notables, I didn't see anything all that exciting at my first table. I did end up playing a couple of hands, which we'll go over now. In this first hand, I opened ace-8 suited in early position and only the big blind calls. We flop ourselves second pair, decide to check it back here, could go for a bet, but not really sure how often I'll be happy with a call. The turn is a pretty bad card. We could consider betting now, but there's so many hands that beat us. Decide to check back. The river brings a card that shouldn't change the board a whole lot. 7-6 is already a straight, 2 hearts are already a flush, and Shades checks it to us again. At this point, feeling pretty good about the value of my hand, so I go for a 1/3 pot size bet, and we get called. My hand is good. I believe he showed Jack-8 or something like that, and we get shipped the pot. At this point, I'm starting to shake off my nerves, feeling pretty good about where I'm going here and some of my decision-making process. There's plenty of room for mistakes, of course, but it's nice to win a hand. In this hand, Brian Picholi opens. We have a call here. I think we could 3-bet, but we want to keep things in that will be dominating, so I just call. The big blind also calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop. Flop comes out ace-8 deuce. Pretty good flop for my hand, and the pre-flop raiser checks. I'm going to go for some value here. The big blind can have every worse ace, but we just end up taking it down. Nice to take down another one. In this next hand, we open king-jack offsuit in middle position. We end up getting a call from the cutoff, call from the small blind, and the big blind folds. Flop comes out jack high, but our hand is not really great on this coordinated board. We check. Cutoff bets, decide to call. Turn is a 5. We block king-queen, and we still have the best hand here a lot. We also have a gutter. The river goes check-check, and my hand is good against ace-queen. A little bit surprised that he didn't choose to bluff without hearts in hand, and I would have had a tough time if he had, but we get off easy here. This hand I think we make a bit of a mistake on, but it's an interesting one to talk about. I open ace-10 suited under the gun, and we get one call from middle position. The flop comes out 8-5 deuce two-tone, and we have a backdoor, but I don't think it's a super great spot to bet. We could definitely check call. Our hand will be good sometimes, but I do go for the bet. He calls, and now I check. He goes for a bet, and it's pretty big. I don't think we can really call here. All we have is a gutter, but in game, I call. The river comes a brick. Can't really do much now. Our hand will be good sometimes, but we just really struggle to call and be right enough here against any sort of reasonable size. He goes for a really big sizing, and now our decision's really clear cut. We just have to fold. Bit of a misstep there. Definitely shouldn't be calling the turn, but we gotta shrug it off and move on. The event's long. There's gonna be room for mistakes, and maneuvering and really growing out from there. In this next hand, I wake up with pocket jacks in the big blind. There's no small blind in this hand. Middle position opens, the hijack calls, the cutoff 3-bets, but pretty small, and it folds to me. Interesting decision here. We could definitely 4-bet, we could definitely just call. I think 4-betting just helps clarify where we're at, and we sometimes just take it down pre. That's what we end up doing here, and we get to win another one in this main event. In this next hand, we're finally at a new table, and it is a little bit better than the previous one. Definitely seems a little bit softer, not as many notables for sure. We see a raise from the hijack, and with 7-6 suited in the cutoff, I decide to put the pressure on early with a 3-bet. Folds back around him, and he's the only one who makes the call. Flop comes out, ace 9-6. I'm gonna keep betting here. I go for a small size, which I would do with most of my range, and we just take it down. This next hand represents one of the weirdest spots I've played in pretty much any tournament ever. There's an open from under the gun +1, a call from under the gun +2, folds to me with queens. Pretty clear-cut spot to 3-bet, so I go for a reasonably big size here, and it folds back around to under the gun. So far, we don't have much info on him, but he makes the call, and so does under the gun +2. We go 3 ways to a flop that is ace high. Certain ace high boards, I might not c-bet, but on this one, I'll be betting my whole range pretty small. I go for roughly 1/3, which I think is a bit too big. We face a min raise and a cold call, which is just super duper weird. With so many other hands in my range, I would be able to call or raise back. It's just not a board where he should be attacking with a small size. If he has something really good, he should go bigger. If he doesn't have anything good, he should probably just call or fold. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. If I was heads up, I could easily just peel here and continue to turns and rivers and see what was going on because we're so deep. But the problem is with the cold caller, there's just not much I can do. I'm a little bit handcuffed here. One player almost has to have an ace or better. So even though I'm getting this insanely good price of close to 8-1, I just have to fold. They play the rest of the hand out without me, and it's a pretty weird one. The guy who check min raised the flop checks and then just folds to a half pot bet size on the turn. I don't really know what was going on in the hand, but the other player pretty much had to have something pretty good, so I can't be too upset. Kind of wishing I just checked the flop though. Really makes me wonder if I could have gotten to showdown or maybe seen a river king for cheap. But I have to shrug it off and move on to the next hand, very slightly below starting stack. This next hand is another pretty interesting spot. Action folds to me with queen jack offsuit in middle position, and while this is pretty close, I do decide to open it. The hijack calls, the big blind also calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop. Flop comes out jack high. This is great for us. I think we have an interesting choice between checking and betting, but on this board, I'll usually bet most of my range, so I do that with this too. We get 2 callers though, and the turn is a 7, and we face this weird small lead from the big blind. Not really sure what to think of his range. He has straights in range, he has 7-6, he has jack 7, he has some sorts of slow play things on the flop, but his small size makes me feel pretty good about my hand. Like he might be semi-bluffing with some stuff now that picks up equity on the turn, so I decide to call. The other player in the hand folds, so now we're heads up, going to a river, and the river's the 10 of hearts. He now bets around half pot, and our decision here is pretty weird. I didn't really know how to think about his range anymore. The hands I was worried about him semi-bluffing that had equity now come in, like 9-8 and hearts. We do block with the jack of hearts, any sort of jack X of hearts hands, but there's so many flushes out there that could play this way. Hands like ace 3, ace 4, ace 5 of hearts could all certainly peel the flop, especially multi-way where they are getting a better price, but I'm not really sure what else he is repping. I can't manufacture too many bluffs. They'd have to be some really weird ones like ace 4 of a different suit, ace 5 of a different suit, something like a 6 that just decides to bet turn for no reason and then bluff river. It's hard to put it together, and in-game I decided on a fold, but after the fact I kind of like a call. Oh well, gotta ship that one away, and we're down to about 90% of starting stack. In this next hand, I make a kind of loose open with 7-5 suited. I'm mostly targeting the guy in the big blind at this point who has been pretty far out there as far as his play goes. I've already seen him do a couple more weird things in hands, and I really feel like I'm gonna perform well against him. We face a 3-bet from the small blind though. It's pretty small. It's only about 900 more to call, so I have a pretty easy continue here at these depths, but I'm gonna have to be careful not to get married to one pair. Flop comes out one of those types of boards. It's jack 5-4 two-tone, but he just checks it does. I have second pair and a backdoor flush draw. I don't really want to let him see a free card with overs, so I put out a bet. He makes the call, and we go heads up to a turn. It's another 5. This is my miracle card. I can make a lot of value against slow played jack X, slow played over pairs, and hands like 10s, 9s, 8s, and 7s can easily put in one more bet. Because of his small 3-bet pre-flop, I would include some of those hands in his range that normally I wouldn't. I'm feeling pretty good. I think we should go for a small size here, but I go for a little under half pot. Might be too big. He ends up just folding, and I'm not too surprised to take that one down. Could have just gotten him off of ace king or ace queen, so it's not shocking that, almost half pot got it through. It's the very next hand, and I open ace 10 offsuit in early position. We get a call from MP and a call from the big blind, so we go 3 ways to the flop. Flop comes out queen, queen, 9. It's not a great board for this hand, but I do have some showdown value, so I decide to check. The in position player bets, big blind just folds, so I think we can peel for 1 here. We have backdoor straight draws, ace high, and I'm usually going to be good. We turn one of those straight draws on a jack, but he bets again for a little over half pot. This spot is getting kind of ugly because we could be drawing dead now, but I think we have too much equity against bluffs to fold. So I make the call. The river's a brick. We're not going to win here too often. He bets big though, and there's really nothing I can do. I could try to represent something by check raising the river. It would look really, really strong, pretty much like a boat or a straight only, but the problem is he can have all those strong hands too. I don't think versus this big size it's worth risking such a big portion of my stack, so I just let it go. Kind of unfortunate to put in so many big blinds there, but I think it's okay. In this next hand, I open ace 10 suited from early position. The button calls. He's the player we're trying to get involved in, so pretty excited about this spot already. It gets even more exciting when we flop a gutter and a flush draw. I decide to just check. I can easily check raise this holding not only as a bluff, but also to get action from worse flush draws. It's a pretty great spot to be in. However, he just checks it back, so we turn pretty much the nut card. It gives us our flush. It's somewhat disguised. It doesn't look like we have it too often. I think going for a check here again could be kind of cool. It might suggest we don't have an ace, but in game I got overexcited and decided to try to exploit other ace-x hands. I go for an overbet, which I think is an okay size given that any straight pretty much has to call, and we can get action across 2 streets in a much bigger pot. However, we just get the fold, and I feel a little bit dissatisfied with the result. Not sure if I could have played it too differently, but it always feels sad to get no bets on a hand that good. In this next hand, there's an early position open, but we're currently 8-handed, so he's kind of like middle position. I wake up with ace king and put in a 3-bet. Probably a little bit too small of a size, but he ends up calling and we go heads up to a flop that couldn't be much better. Ace 3. The problem with this board is we're not really going to get a lot of action. It's pretty hard for him to have an ace when there's already 3 of them gone. Flush draws can maybe put in a bet or 2, but might get scared on certain turns that don't complete their hand, and we're really going to struggle to put in a lot of action. I think we should go for a smaller size or maybe even check at some frequency here. I end up going for a sort of standard size. I think smaller would be better. He ends up just folding and we take down another one. It's really frustrating to keep making all these big hands and not getting any action, but what can you do? In this next hand, I open up his pocket 7s in middle position. The button calls, everybody else folds. We go heads up to the flop. Flop comes out queen 10-4, and I think we have a pretty clear check with this hand. I won't bet my whole range here, and this hand fits pretty well into a check call. The turn comes a 6, I check, and he goes for another bet, this time for a significant overbet of the pot, almost 1.5 times. At this point, there's a lot of hands in my range that I could play that I would call here that would sort of perform better. Hands like weak queen X, slow played sets, in particular top set, and there's even a few draws in my range that I could play this way that might even perform better at this point. Hands like ace jack, king jack suited, and ace 10 all have more outs against this sort of action. Can't really improve that much with this hand, so I just fold. Feels like I keep putting in a lot of bets, can't get action when I'm ahead, have to put in more when I'm behind just by nature of the action. But again, chipping down is just part of playing a good structured event. You have to be able to bounce back and keep playing well. The blinds keep going up, and in this next hand, we're playing 200, 400. That's still over 100 big blinds, so can't really complain. In this one, I pick up ace 10 in early position. This is starting to feel like deja vu. I've gotten ace 10 a lot in this event. Flop comes out king 3, and this is a board I'll probably bet almost my entire range on, if not my whole range. I go for a small bet, and we just get the fold. Nice to just get something going exactly the way I want it to. This next hand, we're still at 200, 400, so still over 100 blinds, and this probably represents the hand I misplayed the most in the entire tournament. The cutoff, who's a player we want to get involved in, just calls the big blind. Kind of weird to see somebody limping in this main event where it's not a live event. Just very strange. We have 7-6 off in the big blind and somehow go heads up to the flop. It's king jack 3. We just don't have that much equity, but I think we could lead here sometimes. We'll get hands that aren't a king or a jack to fold a pretty good clip, and hands that aren't good draws. The only issue is that the board is pretty connected, and with only the 6 of hearts in my hand and 1 backdoor straight draw, I'm not feeling that great about it. I'm ready to check fold, so I just check. He checks it back though, and the turn brings the 8 of hearts. At this point, the 6 of hearts in my hand actually represents a decent amount of equity because he wouldn't check tons of hands with a single heart in them. I don't think he has too many 2-heart hands in range either. Doesn't really make a lot of sense for him to check back the flop. I end up going for a bet, and he ends up calling. The river ends up completely bricking out. I figured that most of his hands that call a turn are some kind of second pair, or maybe a 1-heart holding with a gutter. Things like that could definitely play this way. I can't win against those hands, but I can easily get them to fold, so I think I can go for a bet. I also think I can go for a pretty small size because those hands generally won't peel. His really strong hands still will, but I don't even know if there are any in his range. So I think I make a bit of a mistake by going for a bigger size, and it gets even more confusing when he min raises. The worst part about this is that in the previous hand, when he min raised in an earlier spot, he didn't have it. He ended up just check folding the turn after check min raising the flop in a 3-way 3-bet pot. So I'm not necessarily giving him credit here. I don't think he has to have flushes. I think he can have some random 2 pairs or bluffs. 7 high can't win though, so I still can't call. I think my only options here are to raise or fold. I decide I can't put him on a lot of value hands, and he's shown a propensity to make weird bluffs like this before, although not on the river yet. I put in the raise. I felt good about it in the moment, but less so when he called. He shows me the king high flush. Instantly, I felt like my play was pretty bad. I knew that he could play that hand exactly that way. It made the most sense for value, and I think it's a bit of an optimistic and ambitious line to go for this. The only thing I will say is I was proud of myself for not folding just because I was scared, not folding because it's a $10,000 event, but going for it when I thought it was right. It's okay to be wrong, but if I can't pull the trigger, I'm never gonna win. Still, it was frustrating to get cut down to 2/3 of starting stack. It's just important to remember that this is still so many chips to work with. I took the next couple orbits and kind of took it easy, didn't really play that many interesting hands, and kind of tried to play it close to the vest. The next spot I got into was also against the same player. We're kind of developing a little bit of a vendetta against him. He opens the cutoff this time instead of limping. It's once again my big blind, and I have a very defensible hand. Small blind calls, we have a very easy call as well. We go 3 ways to the flop. Flop is queen 9-9 rainbow. I check to the aggressor. Gonna be my standard play with my entire range on this board. He checks it back. The turn is a king. Small blind checks. We could have the best hand here sometimes, and I think that the player in the cutoff is pretty weak and will call with some weird hands here. He'll also be able to have some random gutters. He can have queen X. This is gonna be a good spot for us. So I go for a bet. I want to be on the small side to get action from all those hands we beat. He calls in the cutoff, and the small blind folds. Good spot. We go to the river. It's a 7 of diamonds. I decide to check now. I think that he can maybe bet a queen here some portion, and he might just fold to a larger bet. I think betting could be okay, but it's hard to figure out what we get action from that we beat. It's not a ton of hands. Meanwhile, there are some gutters that missed he could bet. There's random queen X and king X that we still beat. It's hard to feel great about this spot, but I'm planning to check call. When he just bets half pot, I stick with the plan and call. We get shown a hand that kind of sucks. He shows Jack 10. He didn't see bet open-ended on the flop where we could have easily gotten away. We turn the outs that give him action, although it's kind of funny because if we hit any pair, it makes him a straight. Kind of unfortunate. Being cut down to 60% of starting stack is really frustrating though. Have to shake it off, move on to the next hand, and try not to make any mistakes. That one though, I don't feel like was too much of an error. This next hand is a pretty weird one. Under the gun opens to min. I end up misclicking my aces to a min 3-bet, and it ends up just folding around. He's obviously never folding to this size. He makes the call, we go heads up. Pretty frustrated that I missed some value here, but what can you do? Flop comes king 7 deuce, and I'll be c-betting this with most of my range, so I do that here too. He calls, the turn is the 5 of spades, which might not look like a great card on paper. He does have some flushes here, but the problem is when I make it so small, he has a lot of king X in range too. And even some king X that have a single spade. So we absolutely can get value here. I think we could go larger, but I choose a smaller size of 3.2k. He just folds though, so I probably wasn't getting any more action. Once again, making the best hand, getting nothing, but can't really be too upset as I chip back up here once again. In this hand, I open in early position with ace-king offsuit and get 3-bet by the next player to act. So far, he's been pretty straightforward. He looks like some combo of live and online pro. He's probably pretty decent, but he's not super well known. I decided to just call. We could definitely go either way with this hand. A 4-bet would certainly be in order, but I think with the offsuit variety, I don't mind calling. Flop comes queen jack 8 two-tone. I check, and he puts out a pretty small c-bet of 1/4-ish. At this point, ace king can absolutely be good, but there's also some cards I can potentially bluff on. It sucks to have so little equity when he actually has something really good, but I think that we have to peel ace king to this size. I do make the call, and the turn ends up coming one of those cards that doesn't really do anything on the board. However, he just checks it back. The river is pretty different. It changes the texture of the board pretty substantially. Any queen that I could have in range here is now trips and beats his overpairs. I also don't think he would play overpairs this way that often. Plus, I could have some flushes in range, hands like 10-9, ace-10, ace-king, ace-9 suited. All of these could potentially be in my range as well. I could also have boats. So I'm feeling pretty good about a bluff here, but it's kind of scary. I have to put in a pretty big portion of my stack here. I have to represent a strong hand. However, I don't think I need to go massive because my flushes feel a little bit vulnerable now, and I don't want to risk so much of my stack. I decided to go for a little bit over half pot, and he just folds. Man, it feels good to get a bluff through. In this hand, middle position opens, folds to me in the cutoff, and I decide to 3-bet king-queen offsuit. I could just call here, but the offsuit one isn't going to play quite as well, and there's still 3 players behind me left to act. He makes the call, and we go heads into a flop this queen high. This is pretty great. We beat a lot of queen X in range, and he'll have a ton of pocket pairs too. I go for a bet of roughly 1/3, and he makes the call. The turn is a perfect deuce of clubs. Only thing that can really come in is ace-4 suited, and he only has a few combos of that. Decide to go for another bet. He might feel pretty uncomfortable with a pocket pair now, but we have to try to get called by worse queens, as well as those 6s through 10s. He just makes the fold though, and once again we find ourselves getting one bet with the best hand, but can't really complain. We're chipping up. This next hand, things get a little bit weird as we face a limp from early position and decide to ISO next to act. We get 3-bet by the guy behind us, and the problem is he's 3-bet us already more than once. So we can't just be in automatic fold mode. I decide to call here. The flop gives us a lot here with an open-ended straight draw and a backdoor flush draw. It goes check, check. The turn is a 9, and I think we have a pretty interesting decision here. If we bet, we usually fold out everything except for ace-king, ace-queen, and overpairs, as well as his slow-played really strong hands like boats and quads, but we also do get a little bit of value from those ace-king and ace-queen hands. However, I think checking is a little bit better, so that's what I do. We can win at showdown. He checks it back, and the river is a deuce of clubs. At this point, I don't see a ton of value in betting. Yeah, we might get called by ace-king or ace-queen once in a while, but I think he'll still have some overpairs that play this way, and those slow-played hands still loom pretty big. I decide to check, and he now goes for a bet. It's a pretty hard thing to figure out. It doesn't seem like he would wait this long to bluff that often, but I also wasn't sure that he would wait this long with overpairs either. There are a few hands he can have here that would decide to bluff now, because he doesn't feel are good when I take this line. But in retrospect, I think it's a little bit of a mistake. I think I should just fold. I decided to call, and indeed, I got shown pocket aces. Pretty frustrating. Once again, keep kind of running into these runouts where I feel like I have to put in another bet, but this one is probably a mistake. I never said I played perfect, but it's also frustrating that I feel like my mistakes happen to be coming in the biggest pots I've played so far. In this next hand, middle position opens, and I 3-bet with 10s in the hijack. Ends up just folding around. Feels like the story of my life here. I just can't get any action with the best hand. In this next hand, early position opens, our favorite player in the cutoff calls, and we just call with king-queen suited. This is a good hand to play multi-way with, and we have our favorite player in the hand. Ends up checking through on the flop, and we turn a pretty good card on a 10. At this point, I want to start betting. We build a pot for when we make our hand. We also have fold equity against better. Ends up just taking it down. This is a pretty big win for me at this point. Even though the pot's not that big, it represents a pretty decent portion of my stack. In this next position, we face a limp from under the gun. Another pretty weird spot from this guy. I decide to ISO with queen jack. The small blind ends up calling, and early position calls as well. We go 3 ways to a flop, which couldn't come a lot better for us. It's 10 deuce deuce. We have a backdoor straight draw and 2 overs. Better than that, it's just a very disconnected board, so I can easily c-bet a small size with my whole range. I do so, and we take it down. Feels like my bluffs are working at a much higher frequency than my value bets, but what can you do? It's nice to win a pot either way. This next hand, I open with pocket kings in early position. The button calls, the small blind calls, and the big blind also calls, so we end up going pretty multi-way to a board that is not the greatest, 9-6-5 rainbow. However, when it checks to me, I think we need to thin the field a little bit. The problem is a 7 or an 8 are all really bad cards. There are cards that can also give people 2 pair unexpectedly, so I think a bet's in order. I get called for about 40% pot, and the turn is perfect. I just check it back on the turn though, because now I don't think there's so many cards we need to worry about, and there's only one more street to go. Plus, there's only one opponent, and the fact that he's called the flop makes it more likely that he has a 9 or a 6 and a 5 specifically with a straight draw, so I know what cards are bad, rather than if I just check through and really any card could make anybody 2 pair. We go heads up to the river, and he just checks again, so now we have to go for value, kind of targeting a 9 or a 6, maybe a 5 will call sometimes, but we know we need to get called by 1 pair. I go for 68% pot, which might be a little on the big side given it's about a quarter of his remaining stack, but I go for it and he just folds. Still, it's nice to take down a pot with kings. The next hand is pretty interesting too. There's a limper from middle position and I have aces. I ISO to 3 big blinds, but I don't exactly get away with isolating. Somehow we end up going 5 ways to the flop, not something you want to do with aces, and it gets even more confusing when we flop top set. The board's really coordinated and we're super multi-way, but the problem is I look really strong when I bet here. I also have a hand that blocks all the hands that I want to have continue, except for draws. But since I don't block the draws and they can call and the turn could bring a lot of bad cards, I think we have to bet. I end up just going for a small size, right around a quarter, and it somehow folds all the way around. It's kind of frustrating to keep making the absolute minimum with aces, but I guess if everybody's gonna fold on the flop, I'm glad it was a 5-way pot after all. This next hand, under the gun, opens. It folds to me in the big blind with king queen, and we have an easy call to a min bet. Flop comes jack jack 8, we check, we face a check back, which kind of confused me. I guess he's checking a lot of these boards that have a lot of middling cards. The turn is another jack, and when he checks flop, yeah, he can have some slow plays, but I can have basically every jack in the deck. I definitely have range advantage here. I decide to start with an overbet so I can apply maximum pressure on river if I need to, and if a king or a queen comes, I may actually make the best hand versus calling range. He just folds though, and we get to take one down. It felt really good to put that one together and just execute it. I don't think a lot of people would go for overbets there. You could argue for a smaller size for sure, but I think this one's gonna get it done really often. In this hand, the cutoff opens to 3x, and I have queen 10 of diamonds in small one. It's a weird spot, but I think it's a call. We're still fairly deep here at over 40 bigs. Flop comes out 10 high, I check. We have a backdoor flush draw with our hand too, so I'm ready to call a bet of almost any size, but he checks it back. The turn's an 8, and at this point, I think we can really get value. He shouldn't have a better 10 too often. He has a lot of hands like 6, 7 in range, pocket pairs 5, 7s, and 9s, and other hands that we dominate like ace queen, ace king, and ace jack. I want to get some value. He can also have club draws that pick up equity on the turn, so I don't want to let it check through or maybe be not sure where I'm at when he bets. I put in a bet for 3k and he makes the call. The river's a deuce of spades, which is a beautiful card. At this point, we almost always have the best hand. We can get action from a worse 10, and some of those pocket pairs that I already mentioned, I go for one more bet. He calls pretty quickly, and I do in fact have the best hand. It's nice to actually have the best hand and get 2 streets for a change, but I was shocked at what he called with. Ace 7 there blocks straights, but he blocks almost no top pairs, and I can easily value bet top pair or trips here all day. Nice to get one through and somehow magically find myself above starting stack once again, and maybe more importantly, above 60 big blinds. In this hand, under the gun opens once again, and once again we have ace 10. I'm in the big blind with ace 10 of clubs and have an easy call. We go heads up to a flop. It's pretty good on king 6-3 with 2 clubs. He checks it back once again. One thing I started to really notice about this player is that he was checking back a lot of flops, so it doesn't mean that he can't have any hands here. However, the turn is a king, and I think his check back range won't have a lot of kings on this board. I think with flush draws out there and a lot of straight draws and worse one pair hands that can call, his hands like king jack, king queen, and ace king will bet flop almost always. Instead, I think his check back range is pretty condensed to stronger hands as well as showdownable hands like ace queen, ace jack, hands like queens through 7s. He can have some sets as mentioned, but I don't think we can worry about that. I do think, however, that he'll call the turn pretty often, so I'm already thinking ahead to the river if I don't improve. I'm thinking about it, and I plan that I want to get in a biggish bet now, and then be ready to put in a very large bet on the river to take it away, maybe even an overbet. So that's what I do. I pot it now, he calls, the river comes a relative brick, pocket 9s do improve to boats, but I can't be too scared about that. King 9's not in range, and again, I don't think he has too many slow played hands in terms of combos. Can't get scared now. There's 17k in the pot, but I have to stick with the plan if I want to win this event. I decided to go for an overbet of around 1 1/3 pot. He folds almost instantly, and I feel incredible. Getting a bluff through for half of my remaining stack at the main event is massive here. Instead of having 25 bigs, I'm back up to 65 and feeling great. Obviously, anything can happen. I can't get too excited, but coming from running relatively on fumes to now pretty much average stack, a little bit under, I feel great. The run good continues in this hand. I pick up 9-8 suited and once again get 3-bet by my nemesis on my left, or was that the guy under the gun? Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to have 2 nemesis, but this guy is definitely one of them. He 3-bets me again. I decide to make the call again with pretty much the exact same hand and the same spot as before. I flop open-ended, and he goes for a bet of 1/3. I decided to just call. The problem with a board like this in a 3-bet pot is that my value hands are pretty narrow. 7s and 6s are in there, but he'll probably put me on a lot of flush draws when I check raise. I can't really get a lot of folds from overpairs, although I could get folds from his random flop c-bets. But because we're fairly deep, I kind of want to see if I pick up a flush draw, I could potentially check raise turn and apply a lot of pressure even to overpairs. I make the call. The turn just gives us the nut, so I don't need to worry about that. I check, and he checks it back. Based on his previous play, I figure he can probably play overpairs this way at some frequency. He might bet turn with them, but he might not. But now, he's definitely going to bet river with them. River comes to jack, and I still have the nuts. I feel like at this point, I can definitely put in a check raise. He'll have some slow plays with pocket 10s and pocket jacks. He should value bet queens plus now, and I'm feeling pretty good. I go for the check, and he checks it back. With kings? Oh, come on. This really feels like the story of my main event. Yeah, I made the best hand, and yeah, I'm at my peak stack of the whole day, but the fact that he doesn't put in another bet here is absolutely outrageous. I feel really stupid for not betting, but what else am I really supposed to do? It feels like he's feeling kind of mubsy there, kind of scared of jacks and 10s when he shouldn't be that much. He can still get action from ace 10 and ace jack of spades, as well as a lot of other holdings, but he just checks it back. I feel like I was robbed of a 10 to 20k uptick there. It's only a few hands later where we play another interesting spot. Middle position opens for 2 big blinds, and I'm in the big blind with queen 5 of diamonds. This is a clear-cut defend, so I flick it in. Flop comes out, amazing. Ace 10 7, I have a backdoor straight draw and a front door flush draw. Very easy continue against the small bet here. Check raising is definitely an option. The issue is I don't think I have much of a range advantage here. He'll probably have way more of the strongest hands than I can. Yeah, I can have pocket 7s, but I'm probably 3-betting 10s and aces. Ace 10 suited, I might 3-bet, and he's going to have ace 10, ace 7 suited, 10s, 7s, aces, basically everything. I don't really dominate him on flush draws that often. If he has a flush draw, it's usually going to have a 10 in it or have me dominated. I decide to just call, and we go heads up to the turn. It's a jack of spades, which is an interesting card because it technically gives me equity against some of his range, but it also brings in some of his hands and makes them even stronger. When he puts in another bet, and it's a big one, I don't think we can really check raise here. We're kind of praying that he has something like ace king, ace queen, and get him to fold rather than a weaker hand. He has a few bluffs still, but most of them come in. 9-8 and king queen get there. King jack may not barrel. Queen jack may not barrel. So I decide to just call. It feels kind of weird just calling, praying to hit a card, especially when we don't get there. The turn's the ace of hearts, and we kind of just have to go into give up mode. He checks it back and shows us 10x of diamonds. Pretty brutal. Kind of rough to get a board like this and be this far behind. Also, why couldn't it just be a diamond? Starting to feel pretty robbed once again. It's been hard to get anything going in this main event. In this hand, under the gun opens to 3x, and it folds to me in the cutoff with pocket deuces. Pretty interesting spot. I don't think we have to defend at this depth, especially against this side. But I decide to call, the button calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop. I'm thinking of a particular one, and it actually comes. 7-4 deuce, two-tone. He c-bets 2. This is a dream spot, but he's gone really small. Against this size, I think we need to be putting in a raise. We let him get too good of a price on his bluffs, and his bluffs usually have equity as well. We're also 3 ways, and the guy behind us gets an incredibly good price if we just call, so I put in the raise. However, button folds, and the c-better also just folds. Feels like the same old story over and over again. We just keep putting in money with the best hand and don't get a lot of action. It's really frustrating, but we're back up to 65k. This next hand, the hijack opens, he's our nemesis, and the big blind is our other nemesis. Normally I would 3-bet jacks out of the small line here, but because the big blind has about 20 bigs to start the hand and could find some rejams, especially against this opponent, I feel like a call is in order. He just ends up folding though, so we go heads up to a flop. Not what I wanted to have happen, but can't really complain. King, queen, 10 rainbow is the board and goes check, check. Turns an 8, and I don't think we need to bet here. We'll have the best hand a lot, and he just checks it back. The river is a beautiful 9, so we make a hand that is basically always good. He can also make a bunch of 2 pairs on this hand, and he could be slow playing something like a set or 2 pair from the flop anyway. I go for a biggish bet, but he just makes the fold. Still, it's nice to make this hand happen because I wasn't guaranteed to get any more money anyway. I also could have been behind to just a king or a queen, so can't really complain about getting there. This next hand represents one of the weirdest spots of the tournament. Under the gun opens, there's a middle position call, the hijack also calls, and I have king jack suited on the button. Can't really be folding this, but it's weird to put in 5% of my stack knowing I'm gonna go 5 ways to the flop. That's what we do. The flop comes jack 9-8 with 3 diamonds, checks all the way around to me, and I have a pretty interesting decision here. I could certainly check it wouldn't be out of the question. There's a lot of bad cards, and I won't really know which ones those are if I get action on the flop. That being said, I would rather narrow the field, so then I have some semblance of an idea of what cards are good for me. The problem is, I don't know what size to go for. I think we can go really tiny this multi-way, and do that with both really strong value, mediocre value, and bluffs. I decided to go for 1/3, but I think I should go even smaller. The big blind calls, and it ends up folding around, so we go heads up to the turn. I got what I wanted. The turn is an 8 of hearts. I think this is a pretty good card. It removes some of the hands like 9-8 that we were losing to, although there are still some out there. Also, hands like 10-9 probably won't be scared away from putting in one more bet. There are some made flushes, and there are some boats, but I think our hand's going to be good here a lot. We do still lose to hands like Ace-Jack and Jack-9, but I'm feeling pretty good about this hand. I put in another bet. I think a small bet is what we need to do though, so I go for 1/3-ish once again, and we get the call. The river's a 4. This is a beautiful card. If we were good before, we're still good now. This card doesn't really change anything. There's no way he's hanging out with pocket 4s. I don't think he has an 8, and I think flushes would play faster on some street most of the time. But that being said, I can't really get called by worse now. I think 10-9 and weaker Jack-X usually have easy folds. Queen-Jack might be able to call, but that's about it. I decided to check it back, and we lose the hand to 6 deuce of diamonds. Can't really be too upset. It kind of makes sense when it goes that multi-way, and against a small size, he's going to peel any suited hand in the big blind. But still kind of annoying to have what feels like a setup hand and lose another big pot. Man, it would have been nice to have 50k more. This next hand, I open Jack-10 offsuit for middle position. The button calls, and the big blind also calls. He's our nemesis, in case you forgot. We go 3 ways to a flop that's king high. I'm going to c-bet pretty much range here, so that's what I do with Jack-10. I have some backdoors, and I have the ability to turn the best hand, but both players call. The turn is a 6. I'm pretty much done with this hand. I check. The big blind also checks, so we go to the river. It's an ace. Big blind checks, and now I'm starting to have some pretty larcenous thoughts. The issue is that against my small flop size, there are actually some ace-x hands out there. Plus, people might not really believe me if they have a king. I'm treading on thin ice here. However, there's 22k out there, but I don't think I have to bet too massive to take it down if nobody has a king or an ace. So I go for a medium size of about half pot. It's a little bit over and probably bigger than I should go, but I take it down. I was breathing a little heavily at this point. This was a really important pot. I'm back up above starting stack, but at this point, the blinds are getting up there. I only have about 40 bigs going ahead. This next hand, I open King Jack suited from the cutoff. This feels like another one of those hands that I'm just getting a lot of today. The big blind calls. Flop comes down Jack 9-5 rainbow, and we have a pretty easy c-bet for value. Go for 1/3, and he just folds. Nice to take one down. At this stack depth, almost any pot matters. This next hand, I opened it up a little bit versus players I presume to be a little bit tighter. That's how they've been playing. Jack 5 suited is good enough in the cutoff, but the big blind calls. The flop comes Jack high for us, which is good because it gives us top pair, but it's really connected. I'm not going to be betting all my overpairs and value hands here. I'll be checking some of those back, and this hand, because it doesn't beat a lot of Jack-X and only beats 10x, 9x, and air, is a good candidate to check. Turn comes a 9. He now checks, and I think I have the best hand most of the time, but I still am in check mode. I think we can peel a river bet most of the time unless it's a pretty bad card, or we could potentially value bet to get called by a 10. The river comes a 10 though, and he checks once again. Pretty hard to see myself getting called by worse now, even though I beat pretty much everything. We could conceivably get called by ace high if we do bet here, but that seems optimistic. I just check it back, take the low variance route, and we take it down against a pretty bad 7-5 offsuit. Pretty shocked to see him not bluff that hand. I would have been in a world of hurt against a big bet, so I feel grateful that he didn't go for it. This next hand, middle position opens, and I have ace king offsuit in the hijack. I go for a 3-bet. At this stack depth, it's pretty likely I'd be just stacking off with this hand pre if he wanted to. He doesn't want to though. However, the big blind cold calls, and our friend doesn't even want to peel. So we go heads up to a flop against a cold caller who leads for half pot. I'm scratching my head. I have no idea what's going on. Yes, it's a board that probably favors the cold caller, but not in the way that you would normally think so in a single raise pot. He can have 10s, 8s, and 7s in range, but I don't think those would lead at a super high frequency. Jacks might do this, queens might do this, but it's hard to think he would slow play aces and kings pre versus a 3-bet. However, my options are pretty limited. If I believe I have the best hand, I could shove, but that seems silly. If I just call, the pot's gonna be over 40k and he's only gonna have 34k behind. Am I really gonna call all in on a brick turn? I don't think so. I hate all my options. They all suck. I just have to remind myself that I have all overpairs in range, pocket 10s in range as well, and I just kind of have to suck it up and fold. It feels pretty bad though to put in such a big portion of my stack, over 10%, and then have to snap fold a flop where I was the aggressor. Feels bad, man. I shake it off and move on to the next hand though. Still at the same table, kind of shocked we've been at this table for so long. It's now several hours into the day. We look down at ace queen offsuit in the hijack, and we're a little bit short-handed, so this is a beautiful spot. There's no small blind in play, so I could probably go just to a min raise, but I go for my normal size 4.6k. We face a jam from next act. This guy's been after us all day. He's been 3-betting. He's been checking back over pairs. It's getting to be too much. We have a really strong hand here, but we have to pretty much call off for almost our main event life. If I call and lose here, I'll only have about 14k behind. This is pretty intimidating. That being said, it's hijack versus cutoff. There's not really much I can get away with folding here that's this strong. I would fold ace jack offsuit pretty sure, but ace queen I just have to go with. He can have worse for value, and he can have some bluffs as well. Although pre-flop, it's hard to draw the line between bluff and value. I make the call, and he shows us pocket fives. I'm feeling pretty bad. I haven't been running too good in flips lately, but this is it. If I'm gonna win a hand, this has to be a 1. The flop comes jack 9-4 rainbow. Nothing I needed, no backdoor suit possibility, although I do have a backdoor flush draw if a 10 and then a king or an 8 comes. The turn is a 7 though, so my backdoor potential is dead. I'm not feeling very good right now. 90k pot is about to get shipped to my opponent. My nemesis, the guy who's been a thorn in my side literally all day, but the river comes a queen. I'm shocked, I'm in disbelief. I haven't won a big flip in a big spot in a big event like this in a long time. It feels really good. My stack peaks out at 105k, easily my high point of the tournament, and I'm on cloud 9. I have to remind myself to settle back in. This tournament is far from over, and I need to focus. I still have a good stack, but I need to be chipping up. In this next hand, we've been moved to a new table, the cutoff opens, and I'm in the big blind with 6-5 off. The small blind also calls, and this is a pretty clear-cut defend, getting this price. Flop comes out 7-6-3, so we have middle pair and a gutter, check, check, all the way around. The turn is a jack, and the small blind now bets a little under half pot. Kind of weird spot. Second pair will be good here pretty frequently, but without a spade in hand, it could be hard to continue on a lot of rivers. I still have the gutter, and 2 pair and trips will probably be good. I don't really love this spot. I think it's a fold, but in game I decided to call. I don't hate it though. I could go either way, and this is a spot that we're just gonna have to kind of make a decision and go with it. The river comes to 8 of spades, and now we have an even easier decision. He makes a bet of 18k, and we have a very clear-cut fold. Not much we can do there. Hard to know what would have happened on a brick, but we might have still lost money either way. At this point, we've been in the event for over 6 hours. We're more than halfway through the day. A pretty good portion of the field has been eliminated, and I'm feeling good at close to my high stack point. However, I go several orbits without playing any hand. Just really nothing interesting happened since doubling up, and with the blinds as they are, we're kind of back to the drawing board. However, I pick up ace king in the cutoff at roughly 33 big blinds. This is an incredible spot, big opportunity. The big blind is also somebody with a big stack, so I could really see him fighting back and us getting into a good scenario here. I decide to open to 2x. This is a little smaller than I normally would, but it might incentivize some 3-bets. He makes a 3-bet, but it's a really confusing size. It's not even 3x, and he's out of position. With a bigger stack, you would expect him to be applying some pressure here, so it's hard not to give him a pretty strong hand when he does this. However, I've got ace king, I block aces, I block kings, and I have very good equity against queens or worse pairs. I also can get it in against hand like ace queen, ace jack suited, but it's hard to know how he separates his range when he sizes this way. However, with 33 big blinds, there's not a lot to talk about here. I could just call, but it's gonna be hard to play this hand on a board that doesn't have an ace or a king on it, and those kinds of boards may kill action anyway. If he's got something that we're dominating, we get action from that pre anyway, so it's hard to think of any other option than just going with it. I take a deep breath, I decide to go with it, and I ship it all in. He doesn't snap. I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like I must be ahead at this point. Worst case scenario, he's got 10s, and I'm gonna be on a big flip. But best case scenario, he's got ace queen, and I have a really good shot at a massive double up. He makes the call, and my mind is suddenly racing. The pot's got 163k in it. This is massive. If I win this hand, I'm back up to almost 70 big blinds and a really playable stack. It would be an incredible spot to be in, and I'm already getting excited. Then his cards turn over. It's aces. My mind instantly goes blank. I try to figure out if there's any way I can win with a backdoor, but the flop comes out with none of my suit. I'm almost drawing dead immediately on the flop. The only way I can win this hand is with runner. It's got to be specifically 2 kings, and it's kind of scary when there's only 3 in the deck. My hands are sweaty at this point. I'm praying for a king on the turn, even though I know that with that card, I still am a massive underdog with only 2 outs. The turn comes, I don't even want to look, but I have to. It's the 8 of clubs, and I'm instantly disappointed. Right away, I feel the outpouring of energy and emotion from this spot. It's such a big event. Busting it sucks every year, even online. It was a very different experience, but I was pretty disappointed in the moment. I wrote out a long email to my backers, giving them the rundown of what had happened, how I felt about my performance, and overall thanking them for having faith in me and putting their money behind me. Every time I bust from an event that I was backed for, I feel a little bit bad, a little guilty that I didn't do better for my backers, but I still always feel incredibly grateful that I was given that opportunity. I never would have played this event without them, so I want to give a massive shout out to each and every single one of them. Thank you guys for putting your support in me. It means the world. After sending out that email to them, I recorded a little bit in the moment and regrouped. What is there really to say? Still a no cash main event player. I've never cashed in 4 years. I am glad I played. I think it was a very good opportunity. I felt really good once I started to see the play in this main event, and feel that overall my performance was fantastic. There are definitely some spots I would change a little bit, some sizing stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. I hate losing these events. I would love to go really deep in them. This is probably the year I had my best shot to final table the main, just because there's only 700 runners, 705, I guess. So to bust in, 300 whatever, yeah, it's disappointing. I think I've gotten pretty used to the disappointment. It sounds kind of dumb, but like, tournaments have just been so awful lately. Pretty tough to swallow, but I'm handling it a lot better. I've actually been working with a mental game coach and a tournament coach, so I'll talk a little more about that probably soon. But yeah, I just overall feel grateful to be in the position I'm in, to be able to even play the main, especially in a year like this where like I'm in physically the right location and in the right financial space to be able to do this, with the help of some backers who I also want to give a major shout out to. Probably wouldn't have played without you guys, so really appreciate that. And sorry we couldn't have made money this time around, but hope you guys had a good sweat. Going over these hands will probably sort of suck. I'm gonna hopefully wait a day or two so it doesn't sting so badly, but again, overall, at least in the moment, feel pretty good about how things shook out as far as my performance in this event. I wanted to record that immediately after busting the main to really capture my mentality. I was definitely upset, but even just 20 minutes later, I was in pretty good spirits. I felt I had an incredible experience playing the main event. I was overall happy with my performance, even if there were a few hands I would take back. There were several spots in the event I felt almost nobody who plays at my stakes would have taken. In particular, the overbet bluff that I put in for half of my remaining chips seemed like a spot that was going to work a lot, but I think most people would be too scared to do it. They'd probably hedge and pick a smaller size and probably get called more often. Overall, I can't complain about having the opportunity to play the most prestigious event in poker, even if it was just online. But for now, I have to set aside dreams of winning the main event and being the third poker vlogger to win a bracelet. I'm also going to be back to playing every Sunday, and I'm thinking about starting to stream a little bit more. So if you guys are interested in that, leave me a comment down below letting me know to get off my ass and just do it. No, this is not sponsored by Nike, but if anybody knows a guy, hit me up.